When the Mongol armies moved west out of Transoxiana in 1221, they left behind a landscape that historians and archaeologists have been reconstructing ever since. Cities that had held tens of thousands of people were empty. Irrigation canals that had taken centuries to build were silting up. Craftsmen had been marched east by the thousand. And yet, within 100 years, Samarkand was again one of the wealthiest cities in Asia. Merchants were traveling from Italy to China through these same territories, and the region was producing the political system that would generate one of the largest empires in world history. The recovery of Central Asia after 1221 is in some ways a more interesting story than the destruction. The first thing to establish is what actually happened to the territory. At the division of the Mongol Empire among Genghis Khan's sons, Transoxiana and the lands east toward the Tarim Basin were assigned to his second son, Chagatai. The resulting polity is known as the Chagatai Ulus or Chagatai Khanate. Chagatai himself died in 1242. For several decades, the region was governed under arrangements that separated military authority, held by the Mongol princes on the steppe, from civil administration entrusted to Muslim officials who managed taxation and the cities. The most consequential of these officials was Mahmud Yalavach, a merchant from Khwarezm, who had entered Mongol service early, followed by his son Masud Beg. Under their administration from the 1220s onward, the surviving cities of Transoxiana were reorganized, taxation was regularized, and reconstruction began. Masud Beg governed the region for roughly 3 decades and is credited in the sources with the rebuilding of Bukhara, including the foundation of madrasas there. The pattern is one that recurs across the Mongol Empire. Nomadic conquerors who recognized that settled populations were more valuable taxed than destroyed, and who delegated the running of cities to men who knew how cities worked. Recovery was uneven and interrupted. Bukhara was sacked again in 1273 and once more in 1316 during conflicts between rival Mongol factions, and each setback delayed the process. Some regions never came back. The irrigation systems of parts of Khwarezm and the lower Amu Darya, which had supported dense settlement, were not fully restored, and the archaeological record shows abandoned fields and dead canals across areas that had been productive before 1220. But across Transoxiana as a whole, the trajectory through the later 13th and early 14th centuries is upward, and there is a specific reason for it. The unification of the Eurasian landmass under a single political system had opened the overland routes to a degree not seen for centuries. Merchants, envoys, missionaries, and craftsmen could travel from the Mediterranean to China under one set of authorities. The Mongol administration operated a relay post system, with stations at regular intervals supplying fresh horses, shelter, and provisions to those carrying official authorization, and this infrastructure underpinned communication across distances that had previously been prohibitive. Central Asia sat in the middle of that system. The cities of Transoxiana were not a destination on this network, they were the junction. Merchants from Genoa and Venice operating in the Black Sea ports, Persian traders from Tabriz, and Chinese and Uyghur merchants from the east all converged on the routes that ran through Samarkand, Bukhara, Otrar, and Al-Malik. The Italian merchant Francesco Balducci Pegolotti compiled a handbook for traders in the 1330s that describes the overland route to China and comments on the conditions of travel, and the guidance it offers is that of a route in regular commercial use. The exchange was not only commercial. Historians of science and technology have documented substantial transfers across the Mongol system in this period, including the movement of Chinese medical and astronomical knowledge westward.
the movement of Islamic astronomical methods and instruments eastward, the transfer of textile techniques and designs, and the circulation of agricultural and culinary practices. Craftsmen who had been deported east from Central Asia established workshops in Mongolia and China, and objects produced by them survive. The written record of this traffic includes several first-hand accounts. The Franciscan envoys sent by European rulers and the papacy in the mid-13th century traveled across the steppe and left descriptions of the route, the post stations, the peoples they encountered, and the administration they passed through. Later, embassies moved in the other direction as well. The volume of surviving letters, safe conducts, and commercial documents relating to travel across this corridor in the century after 1250 is far greater than for any comparable period before it. Currency provides another measurable indicator of recovery. Mints across Transoxiana resumed striking coins under Mongol authority, and reforms carried out under Masud Beg's administration established more consistent standards across the region's mints. The circulation of currency of reliable weight and fineness across a wide area is direct evidence that commercial life had resumed at scale, because merchants will not accept a currency they cannot trust.
Numismatists have used these issues to track which cities were functioning economically in which decades, and the picture that emerges shows Bukhara, Samarkand, and the Fergana towns operating as monetary centers well before the end of the 13th century. The Chagatai state itself gradually changed character. Its early rulers remained on the steppe and were not Muslim. Over the course of the 14th century, the ruling elite converted to Islam and became progressively more involved in the settled world. The Khan Tamar Shirin, who ruled in the 1330s, converted and moved the center of government toward Transoxiana, which provoked a reaction from the more traditionally minded nomadic aristocracy and contributed to his overthrow. That tension between the steppe and the zone, between nomadic tradition and settled Islamic governance, defined the politics of the region for decades. By the middle of the 14th century, the Chagatai domain had split. The western portion, covering Transoxiana, became a territory in which the Khans were increasingly figureheads, and real power lay with the leaders of the Turkic-Mongol tribal confederations. The eastern portion, covering the Semirechi and the Tarim Basin, developed separately and is generally called Mogolistan in the sources. That western fragmentation is the immediate political background to everything that followed. In a landscape of competing tribal emirs, formal legitimacy still belonged to descendants of Genghis Khan, but effective power belonged to whoever could assemble and hold a coalition. Any commander who was not himself a Jenghisid could not claim the title of Khan, and the solution that emerged was to rule through a puppet Khan of the correct lineage while holding actual authority under the title of Emir. It was into precisely this system that a man was born in 1336 in the district of Kesh, south of Samarkand, in what is now Shahrazabs in Uzbekistan. He came from the Barlas, a Turkicized tribe of Mongol origin. He was not a descendant of Genghis Khan, and he never claimed the title of Khan. He would spend more than 3 decades assembling a coalition out of the fragments of the Chagatai world, and when he had finished, he would command an empire stretching from Anatolia to the borders of India. The urban recovery that made that possible is documented in the physical record. The Shah-e-Zinda necropolis in Samarkand, a complex of mausoleums on the slope of the ancient Afrasiab settlement, contained structures built through the 14th century with tilework of increasing sophistication. And the sequence shows a building tradition regaining its capacity decade by decade. The craft skills that produced the great Timurid monuments of the following century did not appear from nothing. They were rebuilt slowly across the 4 generations after the catastrophe. The intellectual life of the region also resumed, though along altered lines.
Madrasas were founded or refounded in Bukhara and Samarkand during the 13th and 14th centuries, and the teaching traditions of Hanafi law and Maturidi theology continued without a decisive break. Sufi orders expanded significantly in this period, and the 14th century saw the emergence in Bukhara of the tradition associated with Bahauddin Naqshband, who died in 1389, and whose name was given to one of the most widespread Sufi orders in the Islamic world. The order's emphasis on quiet, inward practice, combined with full participation in ordinary working life, proved well suited to the urban and commercial society of Transoxiana, and it spread from there across Central Asia, into the Ottoman lands, and into India. Agricultural recovery, where it happened, depended on the restoration of irrigation, and this required organized authority. Canals silt up within a few seasons if they are not cleared, and the labor needed to maintain a large system cannot be assembled without a functioning administration and a settled population to draw on. Where those conditions were restored, as in the Zerafshan Valley around Samarkand and Bukhara, cultivation returned. Where they were not, as in parts of the lower Amudarya, the land stayed out of use. The uneven map of recovery across Central Asia in this period is largely a map of where administrative capacity was rebuilt and where it was not. The Chagatai political vocabulary also left a permanent mark. The literary Turkic language that developed in this region during the 14th and 15th centuries is called Chagatai after the Ulus, and it became the vehicle for a major body of poetry and prose across Central Asia, the Volga region, and Mughal India. The name of a Mongol prince who died in 1242 thus attached itself to a literary language that remained in use for 500 years. There is a broader observation that the historical record supports. The Mongol conquest of Central Asia caused destruction on a scale that is not in dispute. The same conquest also created within a generation the largest zone of secure overland travel in pre-modern history, and Central Asia was positioned at its center. Both statements are true, and the region's 14th century is the product of both. History isn't just the past, it's the record of how the present came to be. Comment below with the period of Central Asian history you would like covered next. If this kind of documented, source-based history speaks to you, consider liking and subscribing so more of it can reach you. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals for educational purposes only.